Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our ongoing series that looks beyond the headlines to uncover what is really happening in Rwanda. I am your host, Denise Zaneza, and it's always an honor to guide you through these vital conversations. The human rights situation under Paul Kagame's dictatorship is one marked by systematic abuses, political oppression, and the near-total shutdown of fundamental freedoms. Voices of dissent are silenced through imprisonment, intimidation, enforced disappearances, and far too often targeted killings. To help us unpack this reality and understand its wider implications in the African Great Lakes region, we are joined today by Claude Gatebuke. He's a co-author of the book Survivors and Censored, with over 100 testimonies from survivors of the Rwandan genocide as well as pre- and post-genocide Rwanda. He's a Rwandan genocide and civil war survivor and a human rights activist. He is the executive director and co-founder of the Africa Great Lakes Action Network. Claude, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. Looking only at the last 5 years, how would you describe the current human rights situation in Rwanda, especially in the context of the upcoming UN Universal Periodic Review?
The last 5 years are similar to what we've seen in post-genocide Rwanda under the rule of Paul Kagame and the RPF. It's been characterized by gross violations of human rights, the lack of respect for human life, things that are supposed to be universal rights to people, life and liberty, are trampled on over and over for the regime. I'll give some examples, and I will also add property. So life, liberty, and property. I'm not trying to Americanize this, but those three things are some of the things that are highly trampled on when you talk about human rights and the human rights situation in Rwanda. We'll start with life. In the last 5 years, there has been hundreds, if not thousands. The work is still ongoing to uncover how many people have actually come up missing, disappeared. And in Rwanda, when people disappear, they are completely gone, and you don't see them again. Usually, every once in a while, if you're lucky, they end up in prison. The very last thing is if maybe they escaped and went into exile, but it wouldn't take this long for anyone to not be able to see some of these people. One of the most famous cases is the case of a poet, a Rwandan artist, poet, Bahati. And there has been, he's been lost. There was also one of the I believe he was a spokesperson for opposition party, Dalfa Umurinzi, Jean Mahoro, who also came up missing, is nowhere to be found. And there's been dozens, just for me, that I've directly come across, and hundreds of cases, in fact, of people being disappeared. The other part of life is people being killed, people's lives being taken extrajudicially. So extrajudicial killings still rampant in Rwanda. There is forced and conscription into the military for young people, including teenagers, to go and fight in the Congo, and a lot of them end up dead. There recent research that we did this year in a documentary film that we were working on about Rwandan troops in the Congo. Thousands of Rwandan troops died in the Congo, and many of them were forcibly recruited out of schools. The other piece to the life part of this is torture. Uh, we have seen a number of people, some high profile by Rwandan standards cases, folks like Cyuma Hassan, a journalist who was imprisoned in 2021, which is 5 years ago. And um, only because he was giving a voice to the people. He actually didn't do a lot of commentary himself. He would give people a voice. People like Rashid Hakuzimana, another outspoken public person who used YouTube to broadcast messages. Aimable Karasira, a university professor, an artist, and also someone who was outspoken about the mistreatment of the people by the regime. Yvonne Idamange, a woman who was imprisoned, and part of the torture was the use of being handcuffed for days while she was already in custody. And also, some of the torture was when she was on her monthly period, they would not let her shower, things like that. And so it's another famous case in Rwanda was the torture of Paul Rusesabagina, which was widely and internationally a widely and internationally published case. This doesn't The initial part before he was tortured is it doesn't fall in the last 5 years because he was kidnapped almost 6 years ago, about 5.5 years ago, into Rwanda from Texas, lured to Dubai, put on a private jet, taken to Rwanda, and tortured. But after they put him in custody, he was under torture, and the part of the torture was actually refusing to give him his medication. And those are some of the things that we have seen happen. I mean, the journalist Cyuma Hassan showed some of the effects of torture. Some of the people in prison or in holdings, in detentions, have been held in wet cells. They're dropping water on them, or they've got dripping water into the cells, and the cells are musty and horrible. The conditions, not only in the prisons, are horrible, but prisoners, people who are handcuffed, are being shot, and the authorities claiming that the people were trying to escape or fighting the authorities, but they're handcuffed. They're handcuffed. People are missing from prisons. They been arrested and incarcerated, and during their incarceration time, they come up missing. There's also the destruction of now, if we go to, so we go live and go to, and we also talking about liberty, people who have been taken away from their families and imprisoned, deliberately imprisoned with no charges, and for no reason other than potentially because the government just doesn't like them, or someone in the government wants to settle scores with them, or they just happen to be an outspoken critic. There was a group of people who were imprisoned. They're still imprisoned today, including a journalist, Theonest, of one of Rwanda's newspaper. Theonest Sengimana. And there was a group of people who were imprisoned for reading a book about how to topple a dictatorship, nonviolent ways to topple a dictatorship. And that group is still in prison also. This also happened 5 years ago or less, in less than 5 years ago. So that's like taking people's liberties. You don't even have a right to read a book. And by reading a book, they were imprisoned. And this isn't just confined to them. People who are street vendors are targeted on a daily basis. They're beaten. Their property is confiscated. So this goes to property. Their property is confiscated. Now they are unable to feed their families and their children, and um, they they round up street children and put them in concentration camps that they call rehab camps. Especially one famous one or infamous one is the one on the Iwawa Island in Lake Kivu. Um, and so this is very, very widespread, and it targets the general population, which usually is not talked about that much. And then there are those who are political of conscience, the ones that I spoke about, as well as political prisoners like Victoire Ingabire Umuhoza, the leader of the opposition party, Dalfa Umrinzi. And she is now being in detention for months, and no one actually knows why she's imprisoned. And so all of these cases are all from the last 5 years, including countless cases that are not known, that are a part of Rwanda's trampling on human rights. The last one is on property. Dispossessed, a lot of people have been, thousands of people have been dispossessed of their property in some of the sprawling, poorest parts of the city of Kigali, especially in areas known as Bannyahe. They have actually moved the people, forcibly moved the people out of these areas, and did not actually set up any places for the people to go. They did not compensate them, and they didn't. And the ones who got compensated, they didn't get compensated enough. They were compensated very little, and their properties were destroyed, and they became homeless overnight. And some of this happened during the pandemic, and some of it is happening still today. Another case is a case of Rwanda being a place where Western countries use as a a place where they send those they do not desire. And Rwanda has made accommodations for those by moving people from their living quarters to make room for those people who are being brought into Rwanda. So there is a case where the UK was going to send they were going to send refugees and migrants to Rwanda. And in order to make room for those migrants that ended up not going to Rwanda, because thanks to the resistance of the people in the UK and around the world, um, they moved genocide survivors from their housing areas where they were being housed, and these are poor people, from those quarters so that they can upgrade them for these migrants that the UK didn't want and wanted to send to Rwanda. And of course, now with the mass deportations happening in the US, Rwanda is one of the countries that is taking in deportees. And so the dispossession, the human rights, liberty being taken away, and life being taken away is routine in Rwanda. So this needs to be all in that report, and it needs to be made public, because a lot of people, they have fallen for the okie doke. They've been fooled by the propaganda coming from not only Kigali, but they're paid those like lobbying companies and
Sports
the
washing also, PR. Yes.
companies, and there's also sports washing that is shining a light, or not shining a light, but actually providing a dark cover on what actually happens inside of Rwanda when it comes to Rwandan people inside of Rwanda. And I'm only staying in Rwanda because Rwanda's human rights violations are even worse
Yes.
outside of Rwanda.
It goes beyond the borders. It's true. But
Yeah.
we will come back to that later on in the conversation. Thank you so much, Claude, for describing the human rights situation in Rwanda for the past 4 to 5 years. Of course, we don't have enough time to talk about everything, but this gives us a clear view of how the reality is versus the PR machine that sells a completely different story to the rest of the world. So, as someone who is deeply engaged in the struggle for human rights, what should the UN member states demand from Rwanda during this upcoming UN Universal Periodic Review, this cycle, and why are these demands essential for the future?
I will preface it by saying, stop paying lip service to the issues of human rights when it comes to Rwanda, when it comes to Africans, when it comes to Black people, brown people, and especially people in the global majority. So let's not make it just talk. Let's take real action. Countries that cannot protect their own, there are measures that are supposed to be taken when a country is not protecting its own citizens or is abusing its own citizens. And obviously, Rwanda is also causing serious death and destruction outside of Rwanda's borders. But staying inside of Rwanda's borders alone, measures should be taken against the regime, the leaders of Rwanda, and those who lead agencies in Rwanda that routinely torture. Torture is an international crime. So, the government is basically behaving and has been acting as a criminal enterprise. So it needs to be treated that way. And so the measures that need to be taken are, what do you do when a government actually engages in torture? Take those measures, because this is something that happens routinely in Rwanda. What do you do to the leaders of those doing torture? People like Rwanda Investigative Bureau, the leaders of it, and others. You have also the transnational repression that we didn't talk about. Governments that engage in something like that. I mean, the Paul Rusesabagina case was one of many. There is, of course, the spying on people using spyware like Pegasus and things like that. Those are international crimes. Why then? What needs to happen during this review, it needs to take into account these things and actually take measures and actions that are provided for within international law to address these.
Yeah, and indeed, we have seen in the recent years very strong statements and condemnations from UK, from Germany, from the United States. But despite this high-level diplomatic language has actually changed nothing on the ground in Rwanda. How do you see the gap between this diplomatic rhetoric and real accountability?
Strong statements, I think, mostly have been about Rwanda's role in the Congo, not so much about Rwanda's role in Rwanda. A lot of the institutions, global institutions, multilateral donors, bilateral donors like the US and the UK, and you've got the European Union, you've got the World Bank, and so many others. They actually praise Rwanda. Even when Paul Kagame stands there and makes speeches bragging about killing his opponents and killing his former collaborators and people that he worked with, they've done nothing, and so to me, it's not incoherent. The behavior is coherent. It's support. When you see an injustice and you remain silent, you're supporting that injustice. And that's what's been happening when it comes to inside of Rwanda. But now, where we have I'm not sure if it's cognitive dissonance. it's the justification in a sense of the atrocities Rwanda is committing in the Congo. Is you have on one hand, I'll use the example of the European Union. I believe it was late 2022, if I remember correctly, the year. And I'm happy to be corrected if I'm incorrect on the year. They made a statement condemning Rwanda's atrocities in the Congo, and they usually use even the diplomatic language is very soft and M23 rebels supported by Rwanda, and they turn around. So I'll come back to the M23 rebels supported by Rwanda language. They turn around and they give Rwanda 20 million euros, not for education, not for emergency medicine, not for the dispossessed citizens, for the military, the same military they were condemning of supporting rebels in the Congo. Now, and so now you also have the US that in recent times especially has made some statements. You have a bunch of European countries that have made statements, but yet when it comes to voting within the European Union for sanctions, they don't sanction authorities in Rwanda. They don't sanction anyone in any institutions that are involved in these human rights violations. So now, what do I make of it? I think is your question. That's lip service. That is performative talk. You either you put up or shut up. And put up or shut up to me is you walk the talk, walk it like you talk it. If you are saying that this person, this is a war criminal, and you give him more resources. When you give a criminal resources, they commit more crime. And so to me, that lip service is also a way to provide support, but at the same time looking like they're actually not providing the support.
Yeah.
And so now, what is the right thing to do? Obviously, is to, number one, the European Union still has its contracts with Rwanda for exporting and extracting minerals out of the Congo. Cancel those contracts. Any U.S. Contracts, any U.S. companies that have contracts with Rwanda that's invading the Congo, those should be canceled. International institutions really need to take similar action to what they did when Russia invaded Ukraine. There is all this language of, M23 rebels supported by Rwanda. So let's just say, for the sake of the argument, had Russia used say a proxy rebel group into the Ukraine, would these international institutions then claim that it was not an invasion of Russia, but of Ukraine, and it was Russia supporting these rebels? So there's already the language, trying to dilute and ease what is an actual invasion and occupation of another country's territory, which is a violation of international law also. But also, just like providing comfort for the perpetrator. So that needs to stop. It needs to go from talk to action. It needs to be walk it like you talk it.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Claude. And interestingly, there's in everything you said, it's very clear that there are geopolitical dynamics behind the scenes, and this shapes the outcome of the human rights in Rwanda. And how does this show in the reality on the ground in Rwanda and in the region?
Yeah, in Rwanda, I may consider the fact that you have an army that is actively committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, mass rapes, genocide in a neighboring country, and yet they're playing lip service. When it comes to inside of Rwanda, they are full of praise. They don't even almost hardly ever look at these human rights violations. The because Rwanda gets a pass, and part of it is the geopolitical part of it is Rwanda serves as Rwanda's military serves as a mercenary for Western hegemony in not only the region, especially in Congo, to access the resources, the mineral resources, but also in other places like Mozambique
Mozambique.
right now,
Yeah.
in which is why they gave him those $20 million. They are securing French oil Total companies access to oil, which, by the way, Uganda's doing the same in Congo. I mean, to the extent that Uganda, one of the poorest countries, these countries we're talking about, they're some of the poorest countries in the world. Um, by the way, another thing that I meant to say earlier when I was talking about actions that needs to be taken, Rwanda needs to be on an arms embargo immediately because of the invasions and the mass atrocities and everything that they're committing with the weapons. Now back to how it affects Rwandans inside of the country. Rwandans inside of the country are not even heard. Part of it is because Rwandans inside of the country also don't talk, because when you talk, then you're likely to end up like the individuals that I cited earlier, like Aimable Karasira, Yvonne Idamange, Victoire Ingabire Umuhoza, and others who have spoken and they have been imprisoned for simply speaking, and no real reason, no good reason, and no reason to even hold them. And of course, many of them tortured. So that's and of course we don't exactly know the conditions that Victoire is held in. She may also be under torture. In her book and in some of the what we know now on how she was imprisoned, she was tortured before. Rwandans don't usually even consider it torture, but the room that she was in had no windows.
Yes.
And
Yes. And
um,
today she's facing another type of torture where she's not allowed to talk to her family. There are activities that are basic human rights that she's not allowed to do. So yes, she is
yeah.
facing torture right now.
Yeah, exactly. And her rights are being trampled on. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just detention. It's not even, she's not being convicted
Not
of
no.
a crime. And even if she was, she still has rights. Even prisoners have rights. But when it comes to inside of Rwanda, everything is whitewashed. Everything is, oh, aid works in Rwanda. We give Rwanda money and they make good use of it. Of course, they will make good use of it because they get a lot of it. And it's a poor country. They're held to poor countries' standards, and they also plundering resources out of the Congo. So there's all of this supplement to the budget. But when it comes to Rwanda, I do think that Rwandans need to speak up more, especially Rwandans in the diaspora, because those in Rwanda have the hardest time, speaking out and face serious consequences. Those in the region, similarly. But people in the diaspora in places like Europe and Australia and Canada and the US and other parts of the world where they're not within striking
Mm-hmm.
distance of the government of Rwanda, and where they actually have supposedly freedom of speech, then they should at least be speaking up so that these cases are well known, and challenging the governments of the countries that they've settled in to stop supporting Rwanda's dictatorship. But it's total tyranny inside of Rwanda, and these dynamics make it worse because as long as he serves as a mercenary, as long as Paul Kagame is serving as a mercenary for Western interest, uh, until they're ready to discard him, it's going to be very difficult until and unless Rwandans actually speak up and take a leaf out of the anti-apartheid movement and the fight against apartheid, which Rwanda is practicing apartheid inside of Rwanda. Um, until Rwandans actually look at other past successful struggles for liberation, and Rwandans actually apply those lessons and not just confine themselves to inside of Rwanda and inside, a bubble. then it's going to be difficult to, for any of this attitude of lip service to change, because it can always be justified by the service that Paul Kagame and his regime and his military provide um, around the world. Like I said, I'm giving an example, not only in Congo, but Mozambique. You also have Central African Republic. Previously, there was Mali, and there was Haiti, and Sudan, Darfur. I mean, it's like anywhere you look where they can send their troops, they'll send Rwandans.
Yes. In the meanwhile, when Rwanda continues to secure these international deals and partnerships, and they are sent to secure interests of other Western governments, what can the civil societies and individual Rwandans, either in the diaspora or in Rwanda, do to counter these Rwanda government tactics of enforced disappearances, killings, imprisonments? What can they do practically? Because they cannot just sit around and wait for the international community to do something.
Yeah, I would go way beyond uh, civil society, because a lot of times when you just talk about civil society, people think of organizations or people who are somehow represented in one way or another, in a way that have some type of label. This is a responsibility for every person.
True.
It's a responsibility for every person that actually is in a place where they have some amount of freedom. There is nobody's born to actually uh, be harmed, and nobody is born to look away or look the other way when somebody is being harmed, when somebody's life is being taken, when somebody's liberty is being taken, when somebody's property is being taken, and look the other way and say, oh, there are people who are supposed to be doing this stuff. I actually remember in recent years, there was a family that was going through a very rough time with, it's a business political family, that was going through a hard time with the regime. And when it was time to like organize, speaking out and protest and things like that, uh, one of the the children from the family said, "Oh, aren't there organizations that pay for things like this and all of this and things like that?" So wouldn't use his own money, would to help his family, wouldn't put in a lot of effort because he thought it was work for other people. So this isn't work for other people. This is work for everybody. This isn't work that is a calling. This is work that is just humane and human. And it's this is what Rwandans need to do. It's speak out. At minimum, at minimum, is use technology and social media to spread these stories and make sure that these stories make their ways around the world. This is how citizens of these countries that support the regime actually get to know what's happening, is if you speak and share the stories. When you share those stories, then those citizens use their rights to actually push back on their own governments. This is how it happened even with apartheid South Africa and a number of other movements. They start out, looking at local issues, but you have to play globally. You have to think locally, and you have to act locally, but think globally. And it's important that the liberation of Rwandans we need to understand that it's not going to be in isolation. It's a global movement. The liberation of the region, the liberation of the continent is not in isolation. It's a global movement. And as long as we act and continue to do our part. Everyone needs to do their part. And that part is actually doing something, not just, watching something happen and not just being a spectator or an onlooker or bystander. It's taking steps that actually challenge the regime's narrative. what allows the Rwanda's regime to actually get away with a lot of these crimes is because they are able to control the narrative.
True.
And even when they don't, they control the narrative. They don't control the narrative that their partners hear, but they have enough of a voice with their partners and supporters who provide them with finances and weapons and infrastructure and everything, to be able to justify these things, or to have some type of moral background. And of course, they invested a lot of money in PR and sports washing and other things that uplift this image. So what needs to happen is that every single one of us needs to actually be out there speaking and sharing and putting these stories out. When the stories happen, put them out. And one last thing is share these stories in languages that the rest of the world understands. In understanding that the primary language in Rwanda is Kinyarwanda, but sharing in Kinyarwanda is only going to go as far as the people who understand and speak Kinyarwanda, and that's the people of the region in Rwanda, in Burundi, in parts of Tanzania and Uganda, and parts of Congo. But if you want the world to know, you got to put it in languages that a lot of the world understands. And there are enough Rwandans who speak English and French and Chinese and Arabic and
Spanish.
other languages, Spanish, Portuguese, that can actually get this out. Not that it's about promoting those languages. It's about promoting the stories. And to promote the stories, you got to put them in the language that the audience understands.
Yes, and thank you for highlighting that at the end, that indeed we do say a lot of things in Kinyarwanda, but it stays in the region, or only on the people, even if they are not in the region, the Rwandese people or the Rwandan speaking, though the Kinyarwanda speaking people. So it's very important to use other languages such as English, French, not only to speak out, but also on the long run, to do concrete actions, to bring change, to bring a better situation, not only in Rwanda, but for the whole region, because turning to the region.
It's also setting the record straight, because if we don't, then the vacuum is going to be filled by misinformation and disinformation and PR from the regime.
Yes, because the regime, the Paul Kagame regime, pays for these narratives. They pay for these stories, the stories that they want to tell the world, to be out there. So if we as Rwandans and or other people who feel concerned, if we don't talk, if we don't speak out, if we don't do anything to counter the lies, then it will stay that way, and that is clearly not what we want for Rwanda or for the whole region. And talking about the region, despite official deniers, we have credible reports from the UN, Amnesty International, Human Rights, about Rwanda's involvement in the DRC. And actually, we should not even talk about M23 anymore. We should just say RDF, the Rwanda Defense Forces. How do you understand Rwanda's role in this conflict, both in terms of motives and human impact on Congolese civilians, Rwandan refugees, and also, unfortunately, we don't talk about this a lot, there are a lot of young Rwandans being sent to fight these wars that only benefit Kagame.
Well, Rwanda is committing genocide in Congo. Let me repeat. Rwanda is committing genocide in Congo. So the role of Rwanda's military, not just what I understand, I've actually spoken, I talked about the documentary film that we worked on earlier this year, that came out earlier this year. I've had direct conversations with soldiers who actually were deployed into the Congo. I have names of some of these, high-ranking, colonels who died in the Congo. I like have locations of battles and things like that. Now, I am not the world, but the world has this information also. Like you said, there's not only reports, we have eyewitnesses, there's satellite images, there is, I mean, things can be tracked, weapons, weapon movements, and of course, the expanding cemeteries in Rwanda, military cemeteries, which they ended up changing now. What they do, they don't use the cemeteries as much. But we also have images of like places that were dug up in the Congo or in Rwanda near the border, especially in the Congo during fighting. You know that those are graves. Those aren't, and probably mass graves. Those aren't just, places where people were just farming in the middle of a war. Um, and so the world has this information, and Rwanda's military has invaded and is occupying the Congo. That's what we have. And then they have a front man that they use, which is the M23, that has a handful of um, puppet Congolese that are working with them. Um, and they are these troops, thousands of Rwandan troops have died in the Congo. So talking about young Rwandans being sent to Congo, the tragedy in it is that a lot of them are forced, to doing it. Those who are joining voluntarily, knowing that it's a military that is, that it's invading another country, that's a choice they're making. Those who are being forced into it, that is a crime that is happening against them, and those are two are victims. So there's there's a nuance to it. It's not just a blanket Rwandans are dying in the Congo because, um, they also, by the way, it's difficult to defect from Rwandan soldiers, Rwandan military into others because Rwandan troops will end up shooting you themselves. That's what happened to some of the ones that died in the Congo. So this Rwanda's role is not minimal. And then there is the expansion and Rwanda becoming like one of the top exporters of coltan, a mineral that's hardly almost not non-existent in Rwanda, but it's exporting amounts that you cannot find in Rwanda's soil. The gold and all of these things. So all of these international crimes are happening in the Congo. They're not just happening in a vacuum. Rwanda is one of the poorest countries in the world. By the way, the Congolese elites have been just as bad in this. Well, not as bad because they're not, invading and occupying and, committing all these atrocities, but they've been really bad in how they've treated the conflict. It took years for them to even acknowledge that Rwanda invaded Congo. Now they talk about it. They don't talk about Uganda. Uganda is one of the invading and occupying forces as well. But also, before Rwanda took over all of these border towns and things like that, the Congolese government should have closed the borders with Rwanda and Uganda way, way back and escalated an international commerce issue. But they didn't do that. So going back to now the rest of the world and how it's behaving when it comes to Rwanda and Congo. Rwanda does not have the resources to acquire the type of weapons that they use in the Congo.
Yeah.
So they're getting support, military support. They're still getting training for a variety of European and U.S. military. The U.S. military, I believe, I can't remember. I'm not sure what years it was, but also the Canadian military was training Rwandan soldiers. And of course, you have the money that's sent to Rwanda. I talked about the $20 million to, from the, or 20 million euros, of course, in addition to all of the money that they've sent them, but that was sent to Rwanda's military. Also, earlier this month, in December, early in December 2025, the US approved $150 million for zipline drones that are supposedly to be used in Rwanda um, for medical and healthcare transportation and things like that. One official asked me, what are they actually going to use this for? And when you see how Rwanda's been behaving and what they've been using, all of this technology for, is military operations, is spying, is surveillance, and those type of things. I'm sure, they'll use a few of them to deliver medical supplies and things like that, but a lot of them are going to be used for surveillance and other things. So they keep getting equipment, they keep getting money, and they keep getting training. And all at the same time, the world is saying that M23 rebels supported by Rwanda. Let me ask you this question. Let's have a conversation.
Mm.
Where, anywhere in the world, have you seen a rebel group? I mean, you can tell me, you can look at South America, you can look at Asia, you can look at anywhere in Africa, you can look at, I don't know if you guys have militias in Europe. We have militias in the US. You can look at,
Thank God we don't.
militias based. Are you sure? Might want to research that.
Not that I'm
Uh,
aware of.
yeah, that have that kind of equipment. They have, and they have like a missile defense, well, a air defense system. They can jam UPS. They have GPSs. They have night vision goggles, and even just equipment alone. If you look at the uniforms,
They
usually
are
when you see
new.
rebels,
They are
I
new
mean, not
uniforms.
just
Yeah.
new, but it looks like an official army. Normally, when you see rebels, it's people in sandals, somebody holding a stick, a person wearing a Michael Jordan jersey. They have three guns. It's a ragtag group, usually. And yeah, they might be smoking people, but it's usually ragtag. This looks and acts and behaves like an official military group. I mean, even in Sudan, where there's also like horrible, horrible atrocities happening, in genocide, but the RSF, the Janjaweed militias, by the way, who come from Darfur, where Rwandan soldiers previously were, they're not that well equipped.
Mm.
And those were formed by former dictator al-Bashir. And so now they're getting, of course, the support from the UAE, which also supports Rwanda, um, and other partners who are supporting them in committing the atrocities that they're committing. But even them, they're not as well equipped. They're
Yeah.
horrible. So stop equipping Rwanda, because what you're doing is actually equipping Rwandan soldiers committing a genocide in the Congo.
Yes. And this is, is feeding this cycle of violence and impunity. The fact that Rwanda and the M23 are being supported. What kind of international response is necessary to finally stop this cycle of violence and impunity, like I just said? You talked about arms embargo. Is there
Yeah,
any other ways that they can,
trade.
the
Yeah,
international
trade.
community can act
Yeah,
in stopping this cycle of violence?
100%. Even just the African continent, but the world, number one. If Rwanda can be put in isolation. It's a landlocked country. It's not like a key player in international trade. But if it was shut out of international trade, stop buying any minerals that transit through Rwanda. Okay, so put a trade ban, an arms embargo, trades embargo, travel ban, and basically isolate the war criminals and the leaders of Rwanda. That would be a first and necessary first step. There's obviously a bunch of different things that were done with Russia when Russia went into the Ukraine. Do those things. Stop doing business with Rwandan companies. Ground Rwanda Air, you know? And also, by the way, people individually should just boycott that airline and anything that's tied to Rwanda's um, dictatorship. Now, also, if like the trades embargo and especially economic sanctions were put in place, then people who go there for conference tourism, they wouldn't be going there. There's so many different things that the regime depends on to have the resources to repress, suppress, and, kill, steal, plunder, rape inside of Rwanda and outside of Rwanda that they wouldn't be able to do if they didn't have that kind of support. So those are all tools that can be used. And nobody has to even use any kind of violence. And I always say, people say, the only thing these guys understand is bullets. And I'm like, well, has everything else been tried? And I remember Paul Kagame saying, he will take, this was less than 5 years ago, we're talking about the UPR within the last 5 years. He said somebody would have to invade Rwanda in order to get Paul Rusesabagina out of Rwanda. And I think everybody assumed that the invasion would have to be weapons like shooting and things like that. But not a shot was fired. And do we know where Paul Rusesabagina is right now? Paul Rusesabagina is chilling in Texas. They let him go. And that was because they used the leverage. These international organizations and bilateral donors have leverage on countries like Rwanda where they depend on aid. The US said that they were going to stop a release of $90 million to Rwanda, and that was all
That
the
was it.
invasion that was needed.
Yes.
And you have the World Bank being the number one donor to Rwanda. If they stopped, and if all countries stopped trading with Rwanda until they got their troops out of Congo, that's the number one step. Now, the second step is not just to get those troops out. Second step is justice. There has to be, in order for there to be lasting peace, there has to be justice. And in order for there to be justice, there has to be truth telling. So the people who are directly affected, their voices need to be uplifted, they need to be put forward, and they need to be able to share and speak their stories, but also not only speak those stories, the authors of the crimes need to be held accountable. Those holding the guns, those who pull in the strings, those um, doing things like logistical support, people like General James Kabarebe in Rwanda, General Charles Kayonga, I think he's retired now. That doesn't stop him from being a mass murderer. General Jack Nziza. I think I saw a recent video of General Mubarak Muganga, who I believe is in charge of some major part of Rwanda's military, saying that when you go shooting, shoot in the head. This is something that he actually said. He said it in recent times. So these type of people, they need to be prosecuted for the crimes that they're committing. And when that happens, I think the region is going to be stable. It's going to be good for the world because nobody eats minerals. Like one of a Congolese activist, sister Francine Mukwaya has said before many times. She said, no one eats minerals. You can have the minerals anyway. So why kill people to get to these minerals? And so, international trade will be even better when the region is peaceful. But obviously, those who want to do international exploitation is not better for them because they get it on the cheap by going to displace people and plundering and stealing and then selling it on the making a high profit on it. But that's also is not lasting. You cannot have a lasting business in a place that is insecure, in a place that is that has no peace. Because anytime you displace somebody, that person eventually is gonna want to come back. That person is going to come back because that is the land. You know, if you take them from the land that they own, they've lived on the ancestral lands, they're coming back no matter how much torture, no matter how much of these atrocities are meant to break and tear the fabric of the communities, the resistance is always, existence is going to be resistance.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Claude. And indeed, there would be no peace if there's no justice. That is also something that I deeply believe. And we need to end this impunity in order to have a long-lasting. If there has to be a corporation, anything, there has to be justice. That's the minimum.
Yeah, yeah. And justice is justice. It doesn't matter who, who gets caught up in it. All we want is if a person is guilty, then they need to be punished, to the extent that is, that the law allows, for that person to be punished. And if the person is innocent, release them and let them be free and be free for real. But,
Yes.
no justice, no peace.
Indeed. Well, we could go on talking for hours. So, Claude, finally, going towards the end of our conversation, what kind of message would you like to leave to our audience?
So I just want to first start with those participating in the UPR, to do not mince words when it comes to human life, human liberty, and human property that's being destroyed, all three being destroyed in Rwanda. Do not mince words for everybody outside of the UPR, which is just, on Rwanda, I think inside of the borders of Rwanda. Anyone that follows Rwanda, do not mince words about the atrocities Rwanda is committing in the Congo. And then to the general audience, I want you to know that you are powerful and your voice matters. Your 2 feet matter, and use them to speak up, use them to take action, use them to challenge, especially the narrative and the PR narrative that Rwanda's dictatorial, tyrannical regime has put out, and make sure that you uplift the voices of the ordinary Rwandans, and especially those who are suffering. And do not be intimidated by the trolls, the army of trolls. We know that, like in our book, this book, Survivors Uncensored, we actually have people who give testimony of being part of some of these troll armies. And not only troll armies, but, like really like assigned to do harassment and mistreat people. Do not allow that to deter you. Do not let the bots deter you. Speak up, and that is my message to you. Let the world know. The world must know.
Thank you. And with that powerful message, we have come to the end of today's conversation. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today, and a heartfelt thank you again to our incredible guest, Claude Gatebuke, for your amazing contribution to this conversation. As we say in Kinyarwanda, Imana ifasha uwifashije, God helps those who help themselves. Let that be a call to action to all of us. If you believe in democracy, human dignity, and rule of law, now is not the time to look away. We must reject complicity through silence, and we must raise our voices and speak truth to power. I wish you all a wonderful 2026. Until next time, take care, stay engaged.
Thank you.